knowledge of trees, native plants, and food crops that can grow in this Sonoran Desert setting. And she does it all organically. So she's sort of a walking um, library on how to do gardens here in Tucson. She's got her own urban farm. So, Lorien, now tell us more about what you do and how you got into your work. And by the way, we have about 2 or 3 minutes per answer. So just
Okay.
I'll start waving at you or something when it's time to stop.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I grow plant starts and produce that I sell through the farmers market, through a neighborhood farm stand, and through Pivot Produce. Um, I got started before I can remember. My mother had me gardening as soon as I could stick a seed in the ground, and I've just been doing it ever since. Uh, to do it as a business, I got started um, in the recession when I had completed my associate's degree at Pima and didn't really have the means to continue on with school and had already started growing stuff and selling it. And so just expanded slowly with uh, lots of help from the community.
Thank you, Lorraine. You came in under time, and that's just great because we're going to expand out, of course, as we go along. So, uh, our next person is, make sure I pronounce it right, Dominika. Is that right?
Dominika.
Dominika. Okay, thank you. Dominika, third syllable. Heusinkveld is a journalist and environmental scientist. Between 2020 and 2024, she wrote for the Daily Star and produced the Tucson Garden Guide, a bi-weekly email newsletter about gardening in Tucson and southern Arizona. She currently has a website called desertgardeners.com. And this provides tips on sustainable, ecologically friendly gardening in arid gardens, in arid climates. She will advocate for the use of native plants and creating urban habitat for wildlife. She also works part-time for Strategic Habitat Enhancements. This is a local woman-owned small business, and they focus on landscaping design with native plants. She is a former family medicine physician with a lot of experience working with underserved populations. Her special interest is the intersection between public health, individual health, and ecological health. So what do you do, and how'd you get into it?
Well, I got into it because I was tired of doing medicine.
Hmm.
And when we moved down here to Tucson 10 years ago, I was looking around for what else I could do that was sort of environment related. And I found the dual degree program at the U of A for journalism and environmental science. So that's what I did. And at the end of getting that degree, I basically made a proposal to the Arizona Daily Star to have a gardening column that was specific for desert gardeners because what they had was pretty much, stuff for East Coast and Midwestern gardeners, which was completely useless for us here. And as a growing, learning gardener, I found that I needed that information. So that's kind of how I got started with them. And now I'm doing something similar, but just on my website, and just getting that going this year. So, yeah, that's me.
All right. Thank you. Now, we've already heard a little bit about, we've heard the name of Eric Stanford's business. Eric grew up in rural northern Wisconsin. His first restaurant job was age 14, washing dishes. He worked his way up in kitchens all across the country and landed here in Tucson just about 12 years, 13 years ago, maybe 14. In 2014, he started as a chef at Five Points Market and Restaurant. And I've got a second question for you, Eric, when you speak, is whether that's still open. That restaurant emphasized local community-based sourcing in southern Arizona. He gradually took over ordering products for the restaurant, got to know small scale growers like Lorien, and he decided to find a way to connect growers like them with restaurants that also recognize the benefits of locally sourced food. So he founded Pivot Produce. And this helps local restaurants and other institutions get products from people like Lorien, maybe Dominika, and others here. Maybe there's some others right here who are farmers. So he's aggregating from 25 or more small producers in southern Arizona and distributes to over 20 restaurants and schools, breweries, a hospital, and other people. So Erik, I know you'll have more to say about all that, but tell us from your side, what is it you're doing and how'd you get into this? I mean, I kind of told the story, but let's
Yeah,
hear
you
more.
told the story a little bit. Thanks so much for having me. I see, I recognize a lot of names in the chat, so it's great to have customers and farmers and folks we know here. Yeah, I got into it because I'm obsessed with food and kind of have been since I was a kid. I started eating vegetarian as a teenager, and from that kind of found a love for cooking. And because my family didn't know how to cook anything that wasn't, meat and cheese, so I had to kind of develop that skill on my own. And I think it's really, kind of set off of a lifelong love of food. And like you said, when I was working at 5 Points, I recognized that the quality of product that we were receiving from a Cisco type distributor, kind of a big national distributor, versus the product that I was getting for myself at the farmer's market, those two products were vastly different in quality and freshness. So we started developing relationships with growers, specifically the Santa Cruz market, Lorien being one of those growers early on. And, really it was not only helpful for running the restaurant to have that relationship with the growers, but we started to hear back from some of the farmers that having a wholesale relationship was very beneficial to their businesses, and specifically like a wholesale relationship in which we took time to plan with the growers ahead of time and talk about menus and making sure that we have enough product for our restaurant along with the farmer. So there was a point at which I think my body and my partner were telling me that I probably shouldn't be working in restaurants for the rest of my life, and started thinking about, like, if this is really beneficial for this small group of growers and this one restaurant, it's likely that it's going to be beneficial for many more growers in the area and all of the other restaurants that I've worked at. So it originally started with four restaurants and four farms, and it's expanded quite a great deal from there. Like you said, schools are a big part of what we do down. I'd love to dive more into the farm to school stuff, but that's a general rundown of what I do and why I do it.
Wow. Thank you, Erik. Well, I see a lot of smiles while you're talking. And let's dive into a slightly more substantive question, perhaps. Why is it important to you to be part of local food production and local food support? I think if you've already said your answer, just repeat, and let's hear from Lorien first.
I think for me, it's just part of being a community, because I love to eat. I love to eat good food, and everybody that I meet likes to as well. And just being out in the garden at home, people stop and talk to me just because I'm gardening. And that has turned into the weekly farm stand where neighbors stop by and buy stuff. And they learn about the environment, they learn about what can be grown here and when it's in season here. And it ends up just being about meeting people, about being part of a bigger group. Through the farmers market, because the Santa Cruz River Farmers Market is run by the food bank and has really developed a lot of the means for lower income and minorities, both to participate as customers and vendors, it has been good to be part of building a broader community of people. And I've benefited both in sales and in terms of connections. So many people sharing plants, sharing seeds, sharing recipes, sharing all kinds of knowledge. It's really been an amazing kind of time to be part of the local gardening and food community.
Thank you, Lorien. Dominika, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm not sort of, I'm not really at the point yet where I'm producing food for other people. And I mainly grow perennial plants. I have a very small, well, not very small, but small-ish urban lot in Midtown. It's about, 6,000 square feet. And of course, more than half of that is taken up by the house. But I have 12 fruit or berry producing trees or shrubs or vines. And I just really enjoy like trying to figure out where to stick things in small spaces. And I honestly just think that, I mean, fruit trees to me are just almost like magic. You have this tree that sits there and is a tree, which provides you with shade and beauty and all the other wonderful things that trees do. And then on top of that, you get these incredible fruits off of them once a year, sometimes twice a year. So I think for me, it's really I really enjoy having these creatures in my life.
Thank you. Well, Erik?
Yeah, I think there's a resiliency that happens in communities when we have many people producing a diverse amount of food. As we probably all know, the majority of the food that we eat in Tucson comes from other places. But I think we saw specifically during the pandemic, that the kind of regional food systems that we built in collaboration and community are far more resilient than the food supply systems, national food supply systems, far more resilient to crisis, I guess. Pivot has had a steady supply of eggs for the last 5 years, and the price hasn't changed. Well, it changes when the farmer changes it, but it hasn't changed because of lack of eggs or bird flu or all the things that are national kind of egg suppliers are dealing with. When you know, our growers were still producing during COVID, and well, all the restaurants closed and all the schools closed. We found a different customer base for that product, and we had really no interruption in the supply side, and we just had to figure out a new place to put it. So I guess it's important to me, as we know, whether it's climate crisis or political crisis or that these things are somewhat inevitable, and our community is so much stronger when we have people producing food and eating good food together and knowing how to grow it and knowing how to cook it. So I think it's really just planning for the future. Like there's a lot of importance in this work, and it keeps me excited about it.
There's something in your answer that's reminds me of what Lorien said. What you're talking about, one of the functions here is we're really strengthening our community. It's not just a matter of maybe having organic food versus not so sure, but it's the whole network of the community becomes stronger. We might want to hear more about that. Let's jump though to the effects of climate change. We've got just a few questions about that. And it may be obvious to you, but please tell us what changes you have noticed, if any, in the rhythm of seasons. For example, have planting times changed or harvest times changed, harvest frequency? And Lorien, again, if you could start off.
So yes, definitely planting times and harvesting times have changed. We our last frost is generally earlier. Our first frost is generally later, but it's not dependable in a regular way. We have these exceptional weather events that are very unseasonable, like this cool weather that we're having. This is not normal. And so even though it's tempting sometimes to plant things earlier or later, sometimes the gamble doesn't pay off because there's either an early frost or a late frost that we wouldn't normally have expected. But I think the bigger issue, less than the seasonal changes, has been the change in the overnight lows. We don't see the kind of cooling at night that we used to, and that has a significant effect on the plant's ability to recover from the heat during the day. And so plants that used to be able to tolerate the summer heat without shade now need some shade in the heat of the day, need more deep watering or more frequent watering. There's a lot of subtle changes, and it's hard to tell what they all are going to be because everything's changing. We're still in this big flux. Things haven't settled down into any kind of predictable pattern. So it does change things. It makes every crop a little bit riskier.
Thank you for that. Dominika, I'm sure you've got some observations too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, the biggest, I don't have sort of the long history of planting in Tucson like some people have. It's only been a few years that I've really been trying to grow, non-native food plants. But one thing I've noticed, I've definitely noticed the higher nighttime temperatures, including even in the wintertime, which I think make it challenging to grow cool season veggies. The other thing I've noticed is the just, in my opinion, unpredictability of our summer rains and monsoon season. You used to be able, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I first came to Tucson, you used to be able to kind of depend on an afternoon monsoon rain most days during the monsoon season. And now that rain can come or not come, or if it comes, it can come at 8 o'clock at night, or just really a lot of fluctuations. And again, it does seem to me, at least, that it makes things more unpredictable for people who are trying to grow things.
Erik, have you heard from the people who you meet, like Lorien and Dominika?
Yeah, absolutely. And I try not to speak for farmers too much, so luckily Lorien's here to take on that piece. But I have, I think outside of like seasonal changes, the like intensity of the summer storms has, I mean, I've noticed it increase, and that's something we definitely hear. And because a lot of these businesses that we work with exist mostly outside, and most of their infrastructure is outdoors, um, some of them, don't have a house on the property or whatever. These are kind of like pole shed situations. Is we've seen many summer storms take out hoop houses, destroy infrastructure, destroy crops. Just with the intensity of the monsoon storms that we're getting. So I think it's part of it to recognize outside of how the plants are managing things getting hotter. It's also just getting it's more intense.
Thank you for bringing up that angle. We might want to have the National Weather Service next time on this one. So let's ask another question about climate change. Are there any Is there anything else besides what you've already said? I want to make sure how you or your gardens or your suppliers have been affected by increasing heat and continuing drought. So a chance to ramify if you'd like.
I mean, for me, it's really kind of emphasized and encouraged me to look at alternate sources of water for my plants, food or otherwise. So, you know, gray water, rainwater harvesting, either passive or active. And then in my neighborhood, we also are not far from, I'm not connected to the reclaimed water pipes, but my house isn't super far from it. So I've been thinking about, you know, should I talk to the city about hooking up to that? So I think the water is kind of my biggest concern.
Okay. Thank you. Lorien or Eric, anything more on that?
Um, I think for me, one of the things that has been a change is the recognition that with the hotter and hotter uh, uh, June, July, and August, I have to be mindful of the time that I spend outside.
Mhm.
And there are times when, for personal safety, I need to just let what happens in the garden happen in the garden. Um, it's uh, always been true to a certain extent, but it has certainly changed how I arrange my day.
I'm just curious, show of hands, how many people are themselves doing that, whether they garden or not? Just put your hand up. Yeah, Ann has. Yeah, Eric. Yeah. Okay, Jennifer, Grace. Yeah, a lot of people. Yeah, Etienne. Okay, so we're all experiencing that. Okay, so now, are you or other growers changing what you choose to grow, or are they choosing what differently what they will grow to meet demands or interests of your customers? Is your food palette changing? And Lauren, do you want to start?
So my food palette is changing partly because I'm curious about new foods. I'm curious about new crops that will handle the heat and the drought. And so I try stuff. Um, I find that the customers are more willing to try new things than they used to be. And they're even more willing to try things that in the past they didn't tend to buy. So I grow a lot of herbs because they um, don't take a lot of space for the yield and they're fairly high dollar items. But for many, many years, even though I had beautiful, beautiful herbs, I could take 20 or 30 bunches of herbs and sell five. And all of a sudden, in the past couple of years, people are buying herbs in a much, much bigger way than they used to. And are, again, more willing to try things that they haven't tried before. But it's really driven by me saying, try this, than by them asking for things.
Okay, but there is change, and those herbs are certainly a lot of fun to grow. All right, so uh, Dominika.
I haven't so far. I mean, the fruit trees that I've planted, I research and I make sure that they're at least drought tolerant. You know, a lot of them are Mediterranean, obviously. Um, and then the other thing is, I am starting to think about. I've got this book and I've read it, and I highly recommend it. If anybody it's Eat
Oh yeah.
Mesquite and More. It's
Mm.
by Desert Harvesters. You can get it. It's a locally written book, and I think it's just full of wonderful information on locally grown native plants that people have eaten for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And maybe we can start learning to eat them too. It's just kind of a matter of changing our habits. So that's kind of where I'm going, but I'm just still in the very early stages of that.
Hmm. Well, clearly you and Lorien are both getting people interested. You're trendsetters. So Eric, how would you comment?
Can you remind me the question?
Sure. Um, to what extent are the growers that you're working with changing what they're growing to meet the demands and or interests of their customers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and I think there's also like getting the customers, mainly restaurants, to pay attention to more desert adapted crops and things like that. That's a lot of our work is kind of chef education and getting people to try tepary beans and incorporate them into their menus and stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean that's kind of our business is, figuring out what the market has demand for, and if there isn't someone growing it, kind of find the right person to grow that product. If it's something that we can produce here, we're not encouraging people to start like going blackberries or something that require a lot of water and aren't going to do super well in the Tucson Valley. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that's our work, and I'm constantly assessing not just the demand uh, of restaurants, but what a school has demand for, and what they could purchase for local food is going to look a lot different than what a restaurant gets. And then we manage, I think, 400 direct consumer type customers. They have different needs and wants and demands than a restaurant does. Um, so a lot of times it's finding the right grower for the right market, I guess. What Lorien does is amazing, but it's on a smaller scale than some of our other growers down in Cochise County with 30 or 40 acres. So we're not taking Lorien's products generally to the school district because TUSD is so vast, and a pound of amazing rosemary from Lorien just isn't going to like really help their situations unless they're doing an education or something, and they do that type of stuff. But it's better to connect her products with our direct consumer customers or our restaurant chefs specifically. Lorien grows this amazing, amazing epazote, but finding a chef that was interested in purchasing it took several years, and it's still sometimes a struggle. So it's all about connecting the right product, the right producer with the right purchaser, and that's our role, I think, in the food system.
Well, from all of three of you, the answer seems to be we are doing a lot of education and actually setting trends for people, or at least trying to. Let's look at policies. Um, I think everyone here tonight is very aware that our federal government and state government in turn are um, trying all kinds of attempts at policy and funding changes, and wondering whether you see any challenges to your work from those changes. And Laura, starting with Lorien.
So yes, both directly and indirectly. I was hoping to get a grant from the Climate Smart uh, program, and wasn't able to get through all the hoops before that was cut off. Um, so that's unfortunate. Um, but in a more indirect way, uh, I'm very concerned about things like the Weather Service and NOAA, and having access to reliable climate data, both historical and current. I have been looking at NOAA daily for probably close to 15 years, and it informs my decision making about a lot of things around the farm. And I am very concerned about any changes to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. How about you, Dominika?
Yeah, I agree with Lorien. I think I have a big indirect concern I don't have anything that affects me personally because I'm just one person and I'm not, applying for grants and so forth. But I have, here at the U of A, we have the CLIMAS, which is basically part in great part funded by federal funds, and who knows how long that's going to go. But they're the ones that give us our drought forecasts. They're the ones that provide us all, including farmers and ranchers, with projections for the upcoming season, whether it's the monsoon or whether it's the winter. Are we likely to have a wetter season and not so wet season? All that information, which I think is really critical to people who are producing food. And we don't know if it's going to be there, a month from now. So I think, and because we're in such a unique ecological and climate zone where we're subtropical, we're a desert, but we also have the North American monsoon. We can't use California data. We can't use Midwest data. We have to have our own climate forecast centers to give us that information. So that is a big concern to me.
Interestingly, I was at an event recently where there was a couple of folks from the National Weather Service, and we were chatting afterwards. And I said, I imagine you know about the march that was held in March to protest the firing of federal employees. And they nodded, and I said, what more can we do to support you? And she said, well, I'm not really supposed to answer that question. And but then she said, continue supporting us. That was all that she felt that she could say. Continue supporting us. Erik, it's your turn.
There's so many terrifying things happening in agriculture and federal funding that I think we won't really know. Well, it's hard to see the outcomes right now as they're slashing, but I think in the next year and a half to 2 years, we're going to see a vastly different food system, and people not having access to food, I think, is my biggest concern when we're talking about the new farm bill and funding for specifically things like SNAP. A lot of our farmers, including Lorien, are able to take SNAP and WIC checks at the farmers market. Customers who have those benefits are able to double their dollar essentially to purchase food at farmers markets. Those dollars are probably more beneficial than what Pivot does for our local farmers. Like because growers get a really good price at market. There's also funding cuts that have directly affected Pivot. We have a USDA grant that I'm working on now, and I'll hopefully tell you about at some point. But our direct connection at the USDA has changed 3 times in the last 4 months, and the funding was frozen for I think 3.5 months or so. It's just been released again, but we have to write some silly Doge paragraph to justify this getting this money to do the important work. Also, we partner with the Pasquayaki Nation, and we've partnered with El Rio Health in the past, and we currently have a partnership with Tucson Food Share. All these organizations, we write grants together for us to supply them with food to distribute for free. All the majority of the funding that funded those projects is all disappearing, and that makes up a large part of our business. But it also just feeds a ton of people in this city who generally don't have access to healthy produce. So it's bleak out there. And I think as a business, I think we'll be able to weather it, and we can shift to different customer bases or whatever. And farmers, of course, are going to keep growing food. But it definitely feels like the kind of organic agriculture and ways of thinking that Pivot exists in and our general customers perpetuate is under attack right now.
I'm going to take the liberty, Erik, of asking for a follow-up on that. Organic agriculture, I imagine, is something that RFK is very interested in. Is there leverage through that channel to protect the organic agriculture?
It's possible. I mean, the Make America Healthy Again movement does have some kind of verbiage that aligns with the type of work we do, but I think when it's part of the administration that's actively undermining so many other pieces of the food system and of democracy in general, I don't think like I have very little faith, and I'm not going to put a lot of energy into the Make America Healthy Again movement, just because it's part of a very disturbing and disgusting administration. Stuart, I think you're on mute, unless my computer's.
Thank you for noticing. What gives you hope then? And let's start with Lorien. Eric, you're ready. Go ahead. What gives you hope?
I think, like I talked about at the beginning, that we've built something very resilient, and we have a community of people that are so passionate here about producing food and feeding people in our community really good food that when chaos comes, and it's certainly inevitable right now, that I know that I'm surrounded by people in this community who want to feed each other, and that's I think we're going to find ways to do that no matter what.
Thank you for that. Dominika, would you like to comment on what gives you hope?
I think, my focus has always been kind of on the bigger picture. And so I think for me, a lot of hope is that in the fact that, the US isn't the only country with these issues. There are a lot of other countries out there with a lot of really smart people who have arid lands that they're trying to produce food on. And, you look at India, you look at China, you look at some of the African nations, and a lot of those countries are actually increasing their, the availability of education to their population. So I'm kind of thinking, hopefully that maybe on a global level, we can find some kind of sustainable solution to producing food in areas where it either is more difficult now to produce it, or it very soon will be in the next 20 years. Places that we can produce food now, but we won't be able to in a quarter century.
So you're saying you're hopeful for some there's some global movements towards more education and more sustainable food systems.
Yeah, I think, I kind of feel like sometimes in the US we tend to feel like, we're always the start of innovation, but I don't feel that's necessarily true. I think there's a really good chance that there's going to be other innovations from other countries and other cultures. I just, and hopefully we'll be able to listen to that if it's helpful to us.
Wow. What would you say what would be examples of global food, or let's just say sustainable food systems, whether you're referring to something here or just what you're seeing elsewhere?
Well, for instance, I mean, there's, China has, replanted, I don't know, I think several million trees at this point to try to slow down desertification of a lot of their farmland. I think that's an interesting project. It's not one that we could do in this country for a number of reasons, many of which are cultural. So I think it's interesting to see how that will pan out. They've also revegetated the Loess Plateau. They've turned it from basically a desert into, a lush, green, productive landscape. So, other countries are doing things on, and to go to the opposite end of the scale, Brad Lancaster talks about in his book about an African farmer who on a very small individual scale has created a farm that's, essentially a permaculture productive landscape where he grows a lot more food than you would think he'd be able to, given that he's in an arid climate. So anything really from the small scale to the huge, gigantic scale.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Lorien, what is giving you hope?
I think that there is an energy now, uh, both locally and bigger picture, uh, and it is really uh, grassroots with just ordinary people doing stuff, but finally getting noticed. Um, and it had sort of happened back when Erik was starting Pivot and Edible Baja was a big deal. There was a lot of energy then, and it kind of lost steam. But now, because of the big threats politically and climate wise, I think the steam is building again, and there's a lot of stuff happening. I've had people reach out to me twice recently to do some uh, things on me. I had a interview with K Gun 9, and then I had another interview with Tucson Lifestyle magazine, and both of those were completely unsolicited, and that really hasn't happened in a number of years. So it kind of makes me feel like a lot more people this time around are realizing that there's a lot more at stake, and that it's ordinary people who have to be doing the doing.
Hmm.
Yeah, we need the bigger organizations, we need the governments, but there can be a lot of good innovation at the very hyper local level.
Hmm. So there is some rising up that you're noticing, and um, there are people recognizing that they actually can have an influence. So let's keep these thoughts in mind, and let's open up now to anyone else who's here who has a question. There was one question put into the chat, which got answered by a number of individuals in the chat. I'll just say someone was looking for where do we get desert foods? And so Kate Cause said Native Seed Search has um, some information about seeds, and if you want to do it that way. But if you want to buy some native foods, someone mentioned Susan Silverman mentioned the Food Conspiracy Co-op on Fourth Avenue. There are a couple of other places. Do any of our speakers want to add to that list? Where do you go for native grown foods?
Yeah, of course, there's several spots. Food Conspiracy Co-op's a great one. The Native Seed Search store does have many um, food crops that you can purchase. It's not just seeds. Then the San Javier Co-op farm, just eight or so miles south of town, near the mission out there. They have products that they grow on site that they're selling. I think it's a really cool way to support indigenous farmers, and they do a bunch of like monthly food sales where they're cooking meals and you can go like eat breakfast there. I love that as a resource. And then of course I've got to plug myself and Pivot Produce. We have a CSA program where we do home delivery, and we have several pickup sites. And through that CSA program, you have access to Tepary beans, and during season there'll be Nepal and many more like regionally specific foods are all kind of available on our store, and that program is called Pivot Direct. And I'll drop our website in the chat.
Thank you. I just want to salute you for mentioning yours last. That shows a certain community spirit on your part. Paula.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Robin mentioned heirloom farmers markets, but at least I know the one Sunday morning at Rito Racetrack has a number of vendors with desert foods. So that's another place for people to check. as well as the Santa Cruz Farmers Market on Thursday afternoons.
Thank you. Any more additions to those? Etienne.
I don't know if anyone mentioned, but Bean Tree Farms, who's associated with Desert Harvesters, who wrote the book that Dominika mentioned earlier, I believe they do a pickup at the farm. I believe they also have a farm stand that's accessible, I believe, to the public. I still need to visit there myself, but it is in the Tucson area, and they do produce and sell desert foods.
Super. Thanks for that lead.
And also,
Okay.
I just wanted to add that Desert Harvesters also not frequently, but in the appropriate season, they will have pop-up mesquite flour grinders, so people can bring their own mesquite beans from their trees and grind them. And I believe they come to the farmers markets, in the summertime, basically once the beans are sort of dry and falling off the trees. So.
Great. And Dan put in the chat Udall on Saturdays. Is that the Udall? I'm not sure what that means. Udall on
I
Saturdays.
believe Udall's is on Fridays. I do believe the Oro Valley Farmers Market is on Saturdays, and then sorry, the Udall is on Fridays, from what I remember, unless they changed it.
Where is Udall?
It's a Udall Park Farmers Market associated with Heirloom Farmers Markets.
Okay. Great.
If I'm not mistaken, to whoever
Okay.
gave a good input.
And there's also one in Green Valley, I think Wednesdays. So Heirloom Farmers Market, you can check their website and they list all of their variety of markets.
Nice. I see we got a lot of fans for Pivot Direct here. It's represented by Susan Silverman. That's great news. Tell us, Eric, what is in this week's delivery?
This coming bag, I think many of the bags will be getting a bunch of herbs from Lorien, kohlrabi this week, beets. Right now it's still always hardy greens, either kale, mustard greens, or chard. We're at the end of citrus season, but we'll probably still have some grapefruit in there. Yeah, we try. I think it's generally 6 to 8 items, depending on the size and obviously the expense to us.
Nice. Okay, well let's get some more questions from our audience, and feel free to raise your hand, whether digitally or just manually. Okay, Shay.
Hi, yeah, thanks all of you for being here tonight. I'm a local gardener myself, and I'm still very much trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. In this book that Dominika mentioned, there's a page about beneficial wildlife neighbors in the native food forest, and they've got a photo of javelina, and I'm just wondering how we can quit fighting with each other, because it seems like we're competing for the same crops. Everything I put in the ground, they take out of the ground, and no amount of fencing seems to keep them out. How do we mend this relationship?
That's either Dominika or Lorien or both. Here goes Dominika first.
I think, yeah, you're right. With javelina, you have to have pretty sturdy fencing in order to keep them out. If it really depends on the kind of plant. The thing about javelina, and actually all other wildlife as well, is they absolutely love plants straight from the nursery. So there's some kind of nursery goodness that is in that plant that, wildlife can smell from miles away, and they will come and get your plant as soon as you put it in the ground. So, I really recommend people with freshly bought and planted plants that you really, fence them pretty sturdily to keep out the bigger wildlife, including javelina, as much as you possibly can. And then hopefully a few months down the line, once they've sort of settled in and they smell like all the other desert plants, maybe they'll learn to leave them alone. And a lot of it also depends on what sort of season we've had. Like, of course, we've had a super dry winter. There's not a lot available for them to eat in the wild. And so they will come to your garden and eat your food because you're watering your food and Mother Nature isn't watering their food. So I also just avoid planting. Like I did not plant new plants this spring because I knew it was a waste of time, that things would come and eat them. You know, if we get a really good monsoon and everything springs back to life, then I'll plant in the fall, and that'll be my time to plant. So that's kind of how I handle it as an individual gardener.
In a different setting in Northern California, deer are major invaders of gardens, and you learn what kind of fence to make, you know, and it has to be higher than 6 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So, Shelley,
Yes, hi. Actually, it was funny. I was just thinking I have both issues with javelinas in my front yard and bunny rabbits in my backyard who ate a lot of the plants I put in the spring. But my question is I think more around um did you find it hard to get started? And like what were some of the tricks that you used to just get going with gardening and planting? So probably more for Dominika and for the other guest.
Just began. The put a seed in the ground and give it some water and see what happens. Start small, work your way up, talk to lots of gardeners, join the garden groups online, and have fun.
There's no doubt about that, except when I go out and the bunnies have chewed down something that I loved. But, you know, then you invest in cloches. So what can I say?
Yeah, for me, the big lifeline when I moved back here and started gardening was actually the Master Gardener program. You know, this was like right. A lot of when I was really getting going with the gardening was during the pandemic, and they had all their lectures on Zoom for everybody. And I thought that was just wonderful. You know, they would send you the recording, so if you needed to watch anything over again, you could. And I still think that their lectures are really excellent for beginner gardeners in our area. And then the rest of it, you know, I just did a lot of research on the internet and tried things out. And that was basically, and failed a lot, killed some plants.
Circle of life.
Yeah.
Thank you.
and Etienne, it looks like your comment relates to this issue, because you mentioned working for the small farm called Awareness Ranch using raised garden beds.
Yeah, that's right. I work on a small 5-acre farm, of which we use raised garden beds made out of adobe bricks, which we make on site at the farm, as well as lavacrete, which is sort of locally sourced lava rock, which we use as a building material to make wall systems out of. But we utilize those raised garden beds in combination with a really light electric fence. It's like a rope electric fence with 3 strings, and it's very light to the touch, so it wouldn't necessarily hurt anyone. But that's how we've been able to deter animals. But since we're still relatively new, I mean, I've been working for them for almost a year, but they've started back in 2020. So it's just been a game of adjusting how to do things, especially being out where we're located near the Saguaro National Park West.
Yeah, that is wildlife heaven out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We're near the Brawley Wash, is where we're located.
Yeah, well, that sounds like fun. Is that ranch eventually going to be selling their goods, or is it just?
That's a great question. We currently sell 2 different farmers markets, one of them being the Santa Cruz River Farmers Market on Thursdays, and the other being the Rialita River Farmers Market on Sundays. And we offer organic and aquaponically grown produce, as well as non-GMO and organic fed chicken and duck eggs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like getting more smiles. Paula, you're on. There you go.
Yeah, actually 2 things. Wondered if if those of you who are familiar with what's going on at the farmers markets, Lorien in particular, might know if there has been any impact of funding cuts from the federal government on the double up food bucks that are available. And then I'll have another question after that.
So thus far, we haven't seen new cuts, but in the post-pandemic, there had been some cuts. And I think what we have seen is that with the increase in grocery prices, a lot of people aren't ending up with as many of their SNAP benefits available to use at the farmer's market. If you have to choose between farmer's market produce and basics staples, you're probably going to get the staples first and then use whatever you have left at the farmer's market. And so I think that we have kind of across the board seen our SNAP benefit use go down, which is unfortunate because it does make up a significant share of my income, even though what I'm selling is at the farmer's market is the plant starts. I can receive both SNAP and SNAP match for any of the plants that produce food. So the herbs, the vegetables, those kinds of things are all qualify for SNAP benefits.
Thanks. It's also unfortunate because it means less tasty and particularly nutritious food going to some of those folks. I wanted to ask a different question. Erik, you mentioned that you're working on a USDA grant, and I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what all that is involving.
Yeah, I'd love to. So around the same time Pivot was starting and trying to kind of figure out wholesale markets for and for growers focused on restaurants, some folks at the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona were trying to figure out the same problem, but with the customer base being institutions, like institutions meaning schools, hospitals, university systems, the kind of large scale purchasers, large kitchens, large populations served kind of thing. So in that effort, they started at the food bank. We call it F2I, or farm to institution, and that work has become after a few years of that program operating at the food bank and the group of growers that were participating approached Pivot to become the distributor for that program. So now we operate as the distributor, and we do a lot of the negotiations with the institutions as well. Our prime example of the farm to institution is definitely TUSD School District. They've been really exceptional partners. I think for over 12 years, they've been purchasing local through this program. Like I said, I think we've only been involved for 8, but at the beginning they had contracts that wouldn't allow them to purchase from anyone besides their Cisco distributor, and they had all sorts of barriers that didn't allow them to purchase locally grown food specifically. So we've kind of identified and cleared those barriers over the year to a point at which we're now providing this coming school year, the 25-26 school year, going to be providing almost 20% of the entire district's produce, which is TUSD has 82 schools, individual schools. We're contracted for, I think, almost $500,000 in produce to be sold just to TUSD next year. So it's a huge amount of sales for our growers. So I think we've recognized over all these years of doing this that it's been a huge benefit for our larger scale producers, and of course the schools as well. But in conversations around the state, we found that like a lot of other schools aren't doing it. They're not finding ways to connect with growers in their community. And they're also not doing it when they are, sometimes it's not in a way that's all that beneficial for the grower. It'll be like a one-off purchase of carrots or something, rather than planned purchases over an entire school year in which we can establish prices and make sure that it makes sense for a grower and they can work it into their systems and all this stuff about F2I, which I'd love to talk to you all about on another call because it's pretty vast. So, but I guess what I'm saying is we recognize this program called F2I has had a huge benefit for growers in this area and for students in this area, and that what the USDA grant that we wrote specifically said is can we bring this model to other places in the state, specifically Maricopa County, where there's huge demand and also large production? And through establishing relationships between farms and school districts, can we reduce on-farm waste? We're seeing a lot of the growers up there were telling us about tilling in cabbage or tilling in different things because they didn't have like a large enough market for it. So it's a kind of twofold. And can we build new relationships with schools, and can we reduce on-farm waste and make sure all the food that's being grown is getting consumed? So I've been actively for the past year or so meeting with school districts and farmers across the state, making connections, discovering the barriers that exist, and there are many and they're vast. And we're starting to see sales increase, specifically in Maricopa County, but in other places as well, in which schools are purchasing from local farms and shifting that buying power of a large institution like that has massive benefits on a regional food economy.
Wow. That's
Eric, are
great
you
for the
familiar with?
schools and great for the farmers. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Eric, are you familiar with Local First Arizona?
Of course, yeah.
So is there any collaboration with them going on? They're very interested in sustainability, waste
Well,
reduction.
they helped us write the grant. That was super helpful. They offered a grant writer
Wow.
with far more skill than myself. And yes, we've had many partnerships with Local First, and they could have supported our farm to school efforts.
That's
for sure.
great. So you got a good team. Well, Etienne, did you have something?
Oh, no, I apologize. No, I didn't.
No apologies needed. Just trying to read the room. Well, we've gotten lots of positive comments in the chat, and maybe we'll just okay. What Trace, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm real curious about the potential for our ability to feed Tucson with our renewable water supply. And I'm wondering if any of you have thought about what the potential would be if we really pushed our water harvesting and use of gray water and things of that nature, and really tried to maximize the use of our water. Any sense at all as to what fraction of our food we might be able to tackle with a really extensive city of gastronomy and really major efforts to promote local agriculture?
That's a question for a systems thinker.
Well, in theory, most years we get a lot of rain, what that we could use, but of course the problem is it all comes at a certain time of year, and plants like to grow at other times of year potentially. So, I'm not really sure what the numbers would be if you figured out a way to store that water in an efficient way. It's a very interesting question. There's also our reclaimed water, of course, which is what, the U of A uses to water the plants on its campus, and parts of the Sam Hughes neighborhood use as well for watering. So, I don't have actually any idea how much of that water would be at least even hypothetically usable for that sort of thing. So, you know, certainly you could use it for fruit trees. You probably wouldn't want to necessarily use it for, you know, things like cabbages or root plants or something where you've got the reclaimed water going right on the food. But yeah, it's a very interesting question, I think, and I'm not aware of anybody really having tried to figure out those numbers. I would be very interested in seeing anybody's take on that.
Lorien?
So I don't have an exact idea of that in a broader sense. I know from a personal sense, I have gradually over time tried to change my contours to do as much passive rainwater harvesting as possible. And that does help my overall watering. I've had a hard time because of money getting access to the tanks and the other infrastructure that I would need to effectively harvest all of the water off of my buildings. I could probably do quite a bit more. But I think that the infrastructure is a significant cost that most people aren't able to handle and is probably the biggest barrier to it. But also, a lot of people don't realize how much you can do with just the passive rainwater collection, and that passive rainwater collection can significantly increase the amount of native plants, both edible and non-edible. And I get a lot of people talking to me about how they really want to grow edible things, but they don't have much success. Well, I would say even the people who can't grow edible things successfully can grow native things successfully. And the native things, even the non-edible ones, help our ecosystem as a whole to be more resilient, to balance out the pest problems, to balance out the pollinator communities, to balance out the bird and bat communities, which all help with the pest problems for the people who do successfully grow food. So there's room for a lot more that we could be doing overall.
And Dan Stormont is seconding your motion, just commenting, passive is great for natives and it is relatively cheap and easy. Spoken by one who does that.
If I can jump in and kind of, I think it's a little bit separate from your question, Trace, but when we think about urban agriculture, which a lot of us want to see more food produced within our cities, closer to where people are living, the water that urban agriculturists are using often is coming from the city, in many cases, and that water, as you all know as homeowners, or many of you on Tucson Water at least, is quite expensive, and it gets more expensive the more you use. And farms, if it's a farm, you know, trying to produce for a market to sell, they're generally going to use a lot more water than you are at your house. So we realized that this was an issue, that the tiered rates for our keeping urban agriculturists from being able to afford to produce food. But then also, if you look at your Tucson water bill, you'll also see that there's a sewage rate or a sewer rate. And that rate is based off of the amount of water you bring in. There's not necessarily a meter testing what goes out. They just add that on as like a sewer rate. When we're talking about food production, that water isn't going away. It's either, you know, filtering through the water and becoming more groundwater, or it's becoming the food that we eat. So several years ago, a group of us at the Pima County Food Alliance recognized this issue, and started an effort to work with Tucson Water to kind of remedy this situation, specifically for folks who are providing food for farmers markets and specifically for farm businesses who are serving our community, not for some sort of export situation. And I was fortunate to be part of that effort at the beginning, and I lost track of it. And then about a year ago, some colleagues reached out and said, "We're having the meeting. The ward is, or the city council is voting on our proposal, and it was passed." So Tucson Water and in a partnership with several council people were able to recognize that this was an issue and actually address it, and allow for agriculturalists to apply to be part of. Right now I believe it's a pilot program, but hopefully they'll roll it in and not have to pay those absurd rates when they're serving our community in the way of producing food. And we know that when food is produced closer to where many people live, the energy expense that it takes to get food from other places here is vastly reduced. So I just wanted to share that example of the way, yes, farms use water, but I think the way that they use water is obviously integral, and it takes water to grow food. So we should find ways to do it here in a way that allows farms to kind of stay in business.
So
I know 2 people who have qualified through that program.
would you qualify, Lorien?
So I am in kind of a unique position because my property has a well.
Ah,
So even though I have a city water hookup, my gardens are all watered from the well.
so you don't need that program.
No.
All right. Well, the comment from Jana, who's I think everyone who has water rain basins really love them, but she notes that there's not been enough rain to make much use of those right now. We're all hoping for more rain. So this might be time to start wrapping up. I think that we've heard the joy that you take in your work, each of you, in your particular niche, and the joy that people have in reading what you write, Dominika, eating what you produce, Lorien, and Erik also enjoying the things that you help get produced and distributed. So big gratitude to all 3 of you for your parts in this, and to Erik for reminding us of some of the systemic things that are going on that can support or get in the way of the continued growth of the urban agriculture here.